Well, good evening and welcome to all of our viewers out there in San Bernardino City Unified School District community. Thank you so much for joining us this evening to hear our preliminary recommendations on reopening our schools for the 2021 school year. Please know that these are all preliminary and this is part of the process. We want to hear from you tonight, hear your thoughts on how we can improve our recommendations, and then also provide you information on how we're deciding all of this and where it's going in terms of guidance from our federal government, our state, and our county government. But before we get any further, I want to turn the stage over, if you will, to our interim superintendent, Dr. Harold Volkamer.
Well, thank you, Rachel, and good evening, everybody. I want to echo Rachel's comment, thanking you for being here and investing your time with us. Your participation is absolutely vital to our success in serving the nearly 50,000 students and their families that are in our charge. And so we know that even though the school year just ended last Thursday for our students, you're already thinking about the 2020-21 school year. It's on your minds and it's been on our minds as well. And your voice is critical to what we're planning for next year and how that might take shape. And so we're essentially here this evening to hear from you. That's our primary objective, to hear your preferences, your thoughts, your ideas. And so thank you again for making the investment of time and partnering with us in this process. We know it's critical to our community. Before we get into the work, I just want to give a huge shout out to Dr. Menarez in particular, Aldo Ramirez, who has been her right-hand person in this endeavor, and the work they've done. You know, it started well over a month ago, actually. We got out of the blocks very early on this effort, knowing that some very intense planning would need to occur. When I first approached Dr. Menarez about taking on the leadership for this project, it was very kind of crystal ball. No one knows, no one knew it was going to happen at that time. We had no guidance at all at that point. And she's done a masterful job of taking a very kind of fluid process and laying out a very concrete process for getting the work done. And she's engaged over 100 team members in the process. They've been working diligently over the course of the last 5 or 6 weeks, poring over all the guidance that's come from a number of different sources, seeing what it might mean for the various parts of our operation within the school district, and most importantly, looking at how it will fit our community. Everybody's going to get the same guidance. Every school district is going to kind of get the same guidelines and the same directions, but it's really up to us to see how is it going to fit San Bernardino City Unified School District, which may be very different than how it fits with another school district in another community. And so I want to applaud Dr. Menarez, Aldo, and the rest of the team, those 100 people that have been working very, very diligently on this effort. We know it's not been easy, along with everything else that's going on. The work's not done yet, and your input is going to help us shape the final product in terms of a set of recommendations for the Board of Education. So big kudos to them. Thank you again for being here, and I really look forward to seeing what the evening brings tonight. So thank you, Dr. Menarez. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Volkamer. And David, if you could please bring up the presentation. I realized that I greeted everybody and I did not introduce myself. So I'm Rachel Monades, Assistant Superintendent of Continuous Improvement, a proud Assistant Superintendent to be serving the community of San Bernardino City Unified. So this evening, you're here to, again, hear the preliminary recommendations we have for opening our schools in a physically distanced manner. Please note again, I cannot emphasize enough that these are preliminary recommendations. No decisions have been made. Your voice is important in this process. So that is what tonight is about, to hear what's going on and then to give us some input for improvement and to really be thinking about how we can make this work, bringing children back and keeping them safe and healthy. So let's go through what tonight's going to look like. David, next slide, please. So here is an agenda of what we're covering. And I want to point out that everything that is in bold and underlined, those are opportunities for us to hear from you. So this has always been a little bit of a challenge for us to figure out how's the best way to get input from our community in a virtual setting. and still have it open wide enough that anybody can log in and listen. And so this is our approach. You can see 4 different times where we are going to pause and put a survey up that will have a link on it for you to type into your browser and get the info and provide us feedback. The same information, these surveys, are also available in the description portion of the YouTube video that you are watching, and so you'll see those links there as well. So a couple of places. And then finally, just to share that in the YouTube description links, you'll also see an executive summary, which is much more detailed than what we have in our presentation tonight. The executive summary is both in English and Spanish that you can also look at to just better understand how we would open our schools and keep our students and our staff still safe and healthy. Next slide. So our presentation objectives for tonight, we want to share the findings and the recommendations from our physically distant schools team as we prepare for the start of the 2021 school year. As Dr. Volkemer shared, we gathered a team of over 100 SBCUSD employees ranging from classroom teachers, clerical staff, principals, and directors to really dig into what was the research out there at the time, and then more guidance came through. And so this team has been instrumental in doing this work. Some of the people you saw when we first logged in and you saw their faces. So you'll hear more from some of them this evening. The second part, again, as I had shared, we want to gather input and additional considerations from you as we prepare to open for the 2021 school year. Next slide. So we want to start with a survey question. And the survey question is only one question. And so we'll give you 2 minutes to log into that link right there and let us know, how are you feeling at this very moment about sending your children back to school? Or if you're a student, how are you feeling about attending school next school year? So please log in. It's one question and then there's space for a comment. It is now 6:07. We will bring the results up at 6:09. And we'll just look at what the pie chart is saying at that time. So 2 minutes of awkward silence while you complete that survey. David, if you want to bring the results up at this point so we can see if there's any more people still sharing, that would be great. Thank you. Wonderful. Getting some more responses. Wonderful. I see a few more coming in, so I'll give it a few more seconds. Okay, so we'll go ahead and keep adding, or if you're just logging in, you can go ahead and do that. We're going to move forward. This is very helpful for us. At the end of the presentation this evening, you'll have a similar question, and that gives us an idea of if we have decreased the level of worry based off the information we're sharing. So thank you very much, and we're going to go ahead and move forward. And I'm so happy that I see so many people responding. That's wonderful for us. So let me share with you where we've been, and I do apologize. There is quite a bit of information on this slide. It was really important for us to be able to have access to our Spanish-speaking families and our English-speaking on the same slide. So we will work through it together as a family. As Dr. Volkemer shared, we pulled together this physically distant school team, PDS, on May 5th. And at that time, there was very little guidance that came out from the federal government, the state, or the local county public health, because schools had really just shut down. It had been a little over a month and a half, maybe, that schools had shut down, and people were still trying to figure out distance learning and what the impact of COVID-19 really meant on the states and each individual community. So when the team came together, I asked them to start looking at research that's out there, both nationally across our country, but also what's happening globally, because some other countries were a little bit further along than the United States. And so the teams took their responsibility very seriously and really dug into all kinds of research, newspaper articles, guidance from the state about just the stay-at-home orders, all of that kind of information. And then in the last 2.5 weeks, quite a bit of guidance has come out from the federal government, our state, as well as the county. And so we've combined all of that, and that's where we are today, where we have this draft recommendation, and you can see where the red circle is. We are at the point where we are gathering input. We have shared the executive summary with all of our employees, and they are giving input on it. We have also called random families throughout our district just to get an idea of how they're feeling about sending their children back to school for the next school year, what would help them to feel more confident. And then tonight is our final opportunity to gather information from our community. We had also people, of course, this morning where we did the same presentation and we gathered information. We will be taking all of that information. We will add that to our recommendations. To finalize the guidelines, we'll publicize those guidelines. We will actually be sharing all of the information with our school board next Tuesday night. And we have a final slide at the end of this presentation to speak more about that. And then we'll get ready to open our schools according to the guidance that we get, or the approval that we get from our school board. I want to point out on the bottom that the arrow that goes across, we have to always monitor and adjust our guidelines based off of federal, state, and local guidance. So for instance, if there is a surge that starts to happen with COVID in our county, then there may be guidance from public health that we have to stay on distance learning 100%, even if we were planning on opening up. So no matter what plan we put in place, ultimately, we are responsible to ensure our students and staff are safe and healthy, and our county public health determines that. So that's a piece that we have to be very flexible and nimble. But you can see that the timeline is very detailed. We would plan on preparing our facilities. We would, of course, update you, the community, and we would get our school teams ready to go so that they can start to update you on what's happening at each individual school. So a lot of work to be done, and we're still at the beginning stages gathering input. Next slide. So you may be asking, how is San Bernardino determining what to look at, what's important? All of the, I'm sure you've been reading and listening to the news, and you just hear so much information. So we have 4 guiding principles in SBCUSD. And the principles are designed to make sure that we have learning environments that first and foremost keep our students and staff healthy and physically safe. The reason we did not end our school year the way we normally do is because of a public pandemic that is a health pandemic. And so it is our responsibility to adhere to that safety piece and keeping our students healthy and safe. So that is a guiding principle that we continue to use as we plan for our return to the school year. The second guiding principle is making sure that we're adhering to the Center for Disease Control, which is a federal entity, our governor's orders, the California Department of Education orders, and of course the San Bernardino County Public Health reopening guidelines. So that's our federal, our state, and then our local guidance. And we have to adhere to those guidelines. So keeping students safe, keeping staff safe and physically healthy, adhering to guidelines from the federal, state, and local entities are the two top priorities. From there, we go into our third priority, which is kind of interesting for a school district to say that providing high quality learning experience is a third priority instead of the first one. But again, I want to remind the community that the reason we closed our schools was because of a health need, a physical, and a health concern to make sure that we keep our students and staff safe. And so that has to be primary right now as we think about bringing our students back. But when we think about bringing them back, we want to make sure that we continue to provide high quality learning experiences for them. We know we moved into distance learning very quickly, and we pivoted as a district very quickly, and we made sure that we got the devices out to our students, and any student who couldn't, they had an alternative means by which they can continue learning. And we would continue to do that. We have some learning that we've achieved as a result of that as a district, so we can get better in that area, but we would want to continue to provide high quality learning. And then the fourth guiding principle is it is our responsibility to provide a safe and accessible work condition or working conditions for our employees. We employ over 7,000 individuals, and so we have to make sure that they are also safe and that they have accessible working conditions. So as you listen to the findings and the recommendations tonight, please keep these four guiding principles in mind. First and foremost, keeping our students and staff healthy and physically safe. We were making sure, and we continue to make sure, that we're adhering to federal, state, and local guidelines. We are committed to continuing to provide high quality learning experiences for all our students, and we must ensure that we provide safe and accessible working conditions for our 7,000 employees. Next slide. And so I'm going to turn it over to Aldo Ramirez. As shared, Aldo has been instrumental in supporting this work, working with our planning teams, and digging through the guidance that has been just coming at us like a tsunami, but in a good way. So Mr. Ramirez, please take it from here.
Thank you, Dr. Monarez. I always forget about that mute button. Good evening, everybody. So happy to be here with you all. Like Dr. Monarez said, my name is Aldo Ramirez. I am the Director of Continuous Improvement. I'm the proud parent of a recent graduate from SBCUSD 2019, and a current student that is in high school right now and looking to continue her studies next year. So this work is near and dear to my heart, as it is for a lot of you that have worked on it and that are out there listening to our presentation today. As was mentioned earlier, a team came together in early May. During that time, there was little guidance. And so the team came together and used three primary sources of knowledge to begin the quest of finding what we could do as San Bernardino City to meet the needs of students this coming school year. The very first source of knowledge that we utilized was our professional knowledge. So the team took some time to carefully consider the elements that would be critical for safety around PDS, physically distant schooling, next year. This knowledge was organized into 9 categories, and research teams were formed around each category. On the slide, you see the different teams and the brave individuals that stepped up to lead the teams in their work. And so I'll go over those really quickly. So Maria Jauregui led the team that focused on looking at after-school programs and family supports. Greg Perez looked at the team that focused on transportation, including walking to and from school. Colleen Williams led the team that looked at mental health and wellness. Shannon Flores led the team that looked at our safety in the areas of screening and physical health. In terms of our education structures, Dana Jameson led that team. Ramon Velasco led a team that looked at costs and attendance implications for next year. And Mario Jaquez looked at with his team training and communication. Now, early on, our teams brought up the need for training and communication from their professional knowledge, and this was a piece that actually was not showing up in the little guidance that there was. So we were a bit ahead of the game in that sense. Doug Mefford led our team that was looking at safety and cleaning and sanitizing implications from COVID-19. And last but not least, Tom Pace led the team that looked at the physical considerations with COVID-19 in terms of layout, number of students that could be present in various scenarios. So these brave individuals looked at a lot of pieces of information. Next slide, David, please. The team relied on the three main sources, as I've mentioned before. So after that professional knowledge, then the team delved into research. And the other area of knowledge that they looked at were positive outliers. These are examples from around the nation and around the world that had successfully navigated the spread of the infection. And they used all three of these sources of knowledge to build their research findings and the recommendations that we'll go over today. As the teams progressed in their work, as mentioned earlier, new guidance came from a variety of sources, and they took this guidance and incorporated it into their research and recommendations. In addition to consultation of research, we also had the privilege of working with a couple of physicians from Loma Linda University who were able to answer some of our more technical questions. And they continue to be available to our team today. Our Loma Linda is a wonderful partner. On the slide, you see some of the research entities that guided the work, including CDE, our California Department of Education, CDC, the National Association of School Nurses, Cal OSHA, CASEL, the San Bernardino County Public Health Department, and EPA, just to name a few. At this point, we are very excited to get your feedback and your perspectives as parents and students. We strongly believe that you will make our system stronger. We had a session earlier this morning, and we already grabbed some valuable nuggets from the feedback those folks provided in the morning. So very excited to get your feedback, to get the feedback from our staff, and this will be helpful to our process. As mentioned earlier, if you want to go deeper into the executive summary, which has preliminary recommendations and findings, there's a link in the description of the YouTube page. It's both in English and in Spanish to get it out to more of our team members. Please note that CDE came out with some wonderful guidelines and recommendations yesterday. And so some of those augment what this team had already put together in the executive summary, and will make them slightly different. As a district, once again, we strive to go with those measures that keep students and staff safe, and will incorporate the additional recommendations into the planning as they become available. All additional recommendations, and many will come as we move forward. Next slide, David, please. So what I would like to do now is go over the areas of focus for each of the research teams. I'm not going to provide in-depth findings. That is quite a lengthy presentation, but I think it's very helpful for you to know what were the specific areas that they looked into, the major ones, because they looked into additional areas in each section as well. So very quickly, the education structures team looked at models and options that are available to us as we think about how physically distanced schools look like next year. And so they compiled that information. They also started looking at sample schedules for elementaries and middle schools and high schools, and compiled that information so that can be used to structure next year's opening pieces. Our safety in terms of cleaning and sanitizing looked for the best ways to prevent the spread. And specifically, they found that hand washing is bar none the #1 recommendation from all of the entities. And when hand washing is not available, then the use of hand sanitizer. And so they have compiled information around that is very valuable. They also looked at the best cleaning and disinfecting processes and procedures and compiled that information for us. And so their recommendations are based off of that. In terms of the physical layout team, they looked specifically at seating arrangements, possible seating arrangements in classrooms and other school spaces to ensure that there's a 6-foot distancing between students and staff. In addition, they looked at what kind of physical guides we could employ in the school to ensure that transitions are safe and that the mingling and crossing of students and staff is minimized to prevent the spread. They also looked at implications for visitors and for sharing supplies and resources, as well as how to use physical barriers to guide and help keep everybody safe. Next slide, please. Our transportation team looked at what kind of arrangements need to be made in our buses to make them safe. This is seating arrangements. This is physical guides in the buses to come on and to get off of the buses as the students wait. They also looked at best practices for cleaning, best practices for screening students as they come on the bus, and best practices for personal protective equipment, including face covers, as related to busing. Our mental health and wellness team looked at what are the supports that are going to be needed by adults in order to help our students and to have a safe and healthy work experience. And of course, they looked at what kind of things we could do to support students during this difficult time. Our communication and training team, like I said, were a little bit ahead of all the guidance, and they looked deeply at what communication methods are most effective in a situation like we are in right now with the pandemic. They also looked at what kind of training strategies we could use that would be highly effective in this virtual distance type of a setting. And so they compiled a lot of information in respect to that. Next slide, David. Thank you. Our safety team that looked at screening and physical health, this is very important. They focused in on what the things that we need to do for our vulnerable populations are. How do we keep them safe? How do we provide options for them so that they are healthy and can continue their learning process? They also looked at the technical aspects of personal protective equipment and of distancing and compiled guidelines for those pieces. Lastly, they did a lot of research on best practices in terms of screening at the school, at the home, and in various locations, as well as best practices in monitoring once students and staff are on the campus, keeping an eye on them and how to check to see and mitigate if a student or a staff member starts exhibiting symptoms, how to separate them from others and keep others and them safe in the process. Our after schools program and family support looked at how the seating and physical guides, implications and routines impact after school sports and VAPA activities, and how we can make adjustments to make some of those activities available to students. Also very important, they look at how we can support families during this transition, and our foster and homeless students in specific who are already experiencing stress in their daily lives, and this just adds to that. Lastly, our cost and ADA looked at funding sources to help us implement some of these pieces, and are monitoring the attendance requirements of the state as they have implications for our funding into the future. And so those are the 9 teams and the areas that they focused on and compiled research and information on. What I would like to do next is pause and allow you to please use the link that's available in the description of the YouTube channel, or that is on your screen if you want to just type that into your browser, and give us feedback, so that we can collect your thoughts in terms of the research areas, and any other ideas that you think might be valuable in the area of research. We'll take 5 minutes to do this. It's 6:29, so we'll come back at 6:34. When we come back, we'll actually look at the recommendations from each of the teams. So we'll go ahead and take 5 minutes to provide our feedback. David, after 2 minutes, please show the graph, so that we can all see the information coming in. All right, thank you. All right, team, thank you. We see the responses coming in. Really appreciate your feedback. Please continue to send them in. If you're not quite done with your comments, we will continue to accept them. It is information that we really value. As I mentioned earlier, we've already started to peruse the information provided this morning and have picked up a few nuggets here and there, and looking at patterns as to what your major concerns are with coming back in any kind of a way to schooling. So David, if you could please switch over to the presentation. Thank you. Let's go ahead and go to the next. Thank you, David. So once again, thank you for your feedback. We're going to be using this feedback, the feedback from these sessions, as well as information from a survey of randomly selected families from across the district, and the surveys from staff that we have put out. And all of this will be utilized to augment the research endeavor and to augment the recommendations. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to a few of our section leads who will go over the preliminary recommendations from the PDS team. After their presentation, we will once again seek to gather your thoughts and insights on the preliminary recommendations so we can make them even better. So first we will, just for your background knowledge, the recommendations are organized into 6 steps that SBCUSD can take in order to prepare well for PDS. First, we'll start with Shannon Flores, who will be going over steps 1 and step 2. Shannon is a nurse with SBCUSD. Team, as you come on to present your sections, please introduce yourselves and your role in the district for our community. Next slide, please, David.
Thank you, Aldo. So as Aldo had said, my name is Shannon Flores, and I am a school nurse at SBCUSD. So for our preliminary recommendations, the use of personal protective equipment, also known as PPE, and maintaining social distancing, which is spacing of 6 feet apart. We need to have an adequate supply of PPE for staff, students, and the health office in order to return safely. For the medically fragile or vulnerable population, a requirement for medical consultation for staff and students prior to returning to school would be necessary. Guidelines for staff to follow and training regarding the vulnerable students at school and distance learning teaching options be made available as needed. Having a place on campus at each school site to isolate any potential positive COVID-19 cases would also be necessary. The incident management team, also known as IMT, would be needed to maintain regular communication and coordination with the local and state health authorities, ensuring that reopening plans are in line with the state and local orders. Next slide, please. We would need to implement a procedure that enables staff and students to self-screen daily regarding COVID-19 symptoms. IMT has developed a self-evaluation questionnaire which can be used prior to arriving to a school campus, implementing temperature checks upon arriving to school, and encouraging staff and students to stay home when sick. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Thomas Pace, and I'm the Director of Facilities. As a parent of students returning to school this fall, one of my main questions is how will my children maintain social distancing while at school? And that is the very question I hope to help present this evening. Structured physical distancing starts with the use of face coverings and by maintaining 6 feet of distance from one another. Next slide. We will help ensure our students' social distance by modifying the layouts of our classrooms, by reducing our bus capacity, and by encouraging social distance through the use of physical guides, such as signage and audible reminders. Next slide. Through the use of physical barriers and by separating your students' belongings into personalized tubs or totes, we can help ensure your students' safety. Next slide. Other critical safety measures will include limiting non-essential visitors during school hours and by seeking virtual activities instead of field trips and other large group activities. Next slide.
Good evening. My name's Dana Jameson, and I am the elementary principal at Muscoy Elementary. And I'm going to go ahead and go over instructional delivery model options. So due to the variety of instructional models and schedules and their implications to all stakeholders, our team's recommendations and the decisions made need to be a collaborative process with bargaining units, students, staff, and families to decide the structures for physical distancing and the instructional models. The stakeholders should take into consideration the following instructional models. First one would be opening with online learning. This would be a continuation of online learning that would include both synchronous and asynchronous learning. It would also include a soft opening at the beginning of the year, which would help to build teacher and student relationships. The next instructional model would be opening with a blended or hybrid learning model. The blended learning or hybrid model, both of them are a combination of both online and at-school learning. Consideration should be taken into account that younger learners and special education students would benefit from more face-to-face instruction, while older students can work more independently. The blended or hybrid learning models would include possible modified schedules such as staggered, split, possible block schedules for middle and high school, half day, full day, and or a hybrid schedule following AB models. A soft opening at the beginning of the year would occur also to build student and teacher relationships. The third instructional model would be opening schools in the traditional model. Please be assured that San Bernardino City Unified School District is committed in working collaboratively on options that will meet the needs of students, staff, and families. The next steps will be to work on specific schedules and learning options. Thank you.
Go ahead and go to the next slide, David.
Good evening. My name is Doug Mefford. I am the maintenance manager for San Bernardino Unified School District. As was mentioned earlier, hand washing with soap and water is the #1 recommendation to prevent the spread. Our team's recommendation is to place portable hand washing stations around campus to assist with regular opportunities for our students and staff to wash their hands. We also recommend the use of hand sanitizer in locations where sinks are not available. The district will be implementing a routine disinfecting of high touch points, door handles, pulls, light switches, countertops, and implementing daily disinfecting of our classrooms. We recommend the purchasing of electrostatic devices similar or a similar product which helps apply the disinfectant in an efficient manner. These devices will reduce the time staff members have to be in classrooms or offices applying the disinfectant, and this can ensure a better coverage. Thank you.
Good evening, Colleen Williams, Director of Student Wellness and Support Services. Our recommendations are around mental health and wellness. The stay-at-home order and social distancing requirements have been difficult for families, students, and staff. Proactively, we are going to address mental health needs, and the district is planning to provide opportunities for staff and students to reconnect through social emotional learning lessons, coping strategies, and relationship building practices. In addition, looking to provide mental health first aid training for our site leaders and our district leaders to ensure that we're supporting staff and their mental health needs, while also providing a similar training for staff to look out for students with mental health concerns. Addressing student concerns and anxieties around first being at home with the COVID stay-at-home orders, and then also their anxieties about returning to the school setting as well. And then ensuring that we continue the referral process. Should students need additional services or supports, we have a referral process through our counseling system to ensure that they get the therapy needs met. Thank you.
Good evening. This is Mario Jaquez, the principal at Kimbark Elementary School, and we've been working with our team focused on communication and training. And so we know that with all these new guidelines and procedures in place that our staff is going to need to be trained, Students are going to need to be trained. Parents are going to need to be educated on the new policies and procedures. And so for us, that was a key component in making sure that everybody's safety is managed, is making sure that everybody's well informed. And so part of ensuring that everyone is clear, we wanted to make sure that there's a clear system to inform and train everyone on the procedures and protocols that are in place. And so using our SBCUSD website as a landing space for all information, all frequently asked questions, and ensuring that everybody is able to access the information easily and clearly is an important part of our recommendation. Ensuring that we create a physically distant school parent-student handbook, both digitally and with physical copies for those who prefer the physical copies. The digital copy we felt was going to be important because as we know, guidelines and procedures change quickly. And so to be able to make sure that that is up to date and clear for everybody, a digital format is probably going to be the best way to communicate that with families. Ensuring that all school orientations are available virtually. So as students transition from elementary to middle to high school or different programs, ensuring that our parents and families have access to those orientations in a digital or virtual format. And also ensuring that we train all of our staff virtually using the same method of Google Classroom and distance learning that we used with our as we trained teachers for teaching students as well.
Thank you, team, for those recommendations. Once again, we're going to take a pause here. And if you would please provide us with your feedback in terms of the recommendations. You can use the link that is in the description section of the YouTube channel, or you can type in the link that is on the screen into your browser. We're going to take 5 minutes to do this. It is 6:46, so we will come back at 6:51. David, once again, after 2 minutes, please put up the graph so we can start seeing the recommendations coming in. After this section, we will go over an example of what a day in the life of a student might look like. So please take your time to give us our feedback, and we'll be back at 6:51. So we want to thank everybody for providing this feedback. It's wonderful to see. I know the feedback will continue to roll in as many of you finish up your comments. In the first survey, we have over 430 responses, which is wonderful participation from our students and families. Very valuable information. David, can you please go back to the PowerPoint? Thank you. Next slide. So what I would like to do now is just give you a brief overview of what the day in the life of a student who might be coming on campus could look like in a physically distanced way. So we'll go ahead and get started with, you know, the very first thing that would happen in the morning is the families would do a symptom check with the student to make sure that they're not exhibiting any COVID-like symptoms. And the parents and families would be using a guide that San Bernardino City would provide to them to do their checking for the symptoms. If the student is exhibiting some symptoms, we encourage the students to stay home, the families to reach out to the schools so that the children can have some work to do from home, as well as provide the families information on how San Bernardino County Health can support them with that particular scenario. If the student checks out and there are no symptoms, then the families would go right into their morning routines, the regular routines that they use every day to get ready for school. Prior to leaving the home, the students would put on their face covering so that they are safe on their way to school. Next slide, please. As students make their way to school, if they're walking, they would be walking in a physically distanced way. The students would have been informed virtually or through that soft opening what this could look like. The families would have a guide to help them talk to their children about how to stay physically distant on their way to school. If the students are riding a bus, then they would also wait for the bus in a physically distanced way, enter the bus in a way that keeps them safe, and then be seated separated from each other as close to 6 feet as possible, as well as ventilation in the bus to minimize any potential spread. Once they arrive at school, the students would go through a screening process. So they would be greeted by staff who would ask them a few questions about how they're feeling and take their temperature to make sure that they are okay and symptom-free. Once inside the campus, teachers would continue to monitor if students are good and healthy. And they would be checking for any students that might exhibit symptoms. If for some reason a student does start exhibiting symptoms, they would be referred over to the health office, where the health office who would be trained to identify the differences between COVID and not COVID type ailments would determine if the student needs to be placed separately, or the staff member for that matter, while they are able to go home. And their families would be provided with information from the county as to how they can be supported, as well as our IMT team would reach out to the county to let them know of a possible case and to coordinate next steps. In the classroom, the students would be seated physically separated. As you can see in the pictures, there's a few different ways of doing that. You can see that there would be less students in the classroom to ensure that they are safe and physically distanced during that time. Next slide, please, David. During the day, the students would also need to transition for a variety of reasons. And those transitions would be very well thought out and methodical. The school would have physical guides to ensure that the children and staff know which side of the hallway to walk on, for example, what areas are off limits that might be high touch point areas that shouldn't be interacted with. Some of these transitions would be to to conduct frequent and structured hand washing. And this might occur in a bathroom or in a portable hand washing station. And this would especially be true before lunch. When students transition over to lunch, they would wash their hands and then experience a physically distanced lunch, whether in a cafeteria with a few students at a time and cleaning and disinfecting in between them, or in the classroom, eating lunch in the classroom, as well as the possibility of getting a grab-and-go lunch if the students are on a half-day schedule. So all three of these options would be implemented in terms of keeping the students safe. Next slide, David. And at the end of the day, if the students are bus riders, they would come to a bus that was freshly sanitized for the students. They would enter the bus in a physically distanced way and be seated in a physically distanced way, guided by the physical guides. If the students are walking home, then they would have gotten a reminder from the school PA system on what that looks like in terms of walking home in a physically distanced way and ensuring that they're keeping their face coverings during that transition. If the students are participating in after-school activities, such as sports or VAPA or CAPS, these would be done in a physically distanced way. As you can see in the picture, the sports would be physically distanced and beginning with calisthenics and things that don't require physical contact, as well as the music students doing their activities outside when possible and away from each other. In terms of the sports, we are also working closely with CIF and their recommendations and with their approvals in terms of what sports can go on. And so this is how a physically distanced school might look like for a student who is coming on campus. Next slide, please, David. So we would like for you to do one last closing survey and poll. If you would please, so that we can better understand where our families and students are with the recommendations, please use the link that is on the screen or the link that is in the description section of the YouTube. Once again, we'll allow you to take 5 minutes to do this poll, and David will put up the chart after 2 minutes. And so it is 6:58 right now. We will come back in 5 minutes. So 6:59 right now, so 7:04. When we come back, Dr. Monarez will go over our next steps in terms of all of this work that we're doing. So please go ahead and provide us your feedback. Thank you so much, everybody, for all of your feedback. We're looking forward to taking a look at the additional comments that we have received. We really appreciate your candid feedback. And I'll turn it back over, David, if you want to go back to the PowerPoint, to Dr. Monades for next steps.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ramirez. And yes, thank you, families. I'm so appreciative. Your feedback is so important. You know, first and foremost, I don't know if this was made very clear, and I want to make it very clear, regardless of what recommendation we make to our school board in terms of a hybrid model or returning to school, whatever that might look like, we will have an option for any family who is not comfortable sending their child back. So we will have a 100% distance learning option for any family who needs that. So rest assured that your child's safety is paramount to us. We don't want any child on campus if you don't feel like you want your child there. So a 100% option will be available to our families. And so here are our next steps. As I shared in the beginning, we were going to gather feedback and revise those preliminary recommendations. The information that was shared tonight, the information that we're receiving from our random phone calls to families, and the information shared receiving from our employee groups, those will come together, and we will revise the recommendations as appropriate. And I want to explain just a little bit why I say as appropriate, because remember, one of our principles, our guiding principles, is that we have to adhere to federal, state, and local guidance. And so we cannot revise if we're not in alignment with that federal, state, and local guidance. We don't anticipate that's going to be a problem, but I just want to be very honest and transparent with our community. If there's any recommendation that's provided through our feedback process that is not in alignment with federal, state, or local guidance, we wouldn't be able to do that. But we will keep in mind our guiding principles of keeping our students safe and healthy, and our staff. The next recommendation is the date that you want to put on your calendar and join us. Next Tuesday night, we have a regularly scheduled board meeting, and that's where we will be presenting the reopening recommendations. And so I really encourage you to log in and to hear those final recommendations that will be shared with the board, and to listen for how your input helped to shape our recommendations that are presented. So next Tuesday night, our regular scheduled board meeting, we will be providing the recommendations to our board. We are going to develop a frequently asked questions for family or FAQ for families document within the next 2 weeks, and we'll be posting that on our SBCUSD Ready webpage. The SBCUSD Ready is the webpage that holds all of our information around COVID and the school closing, and so that's the one that you want to bookmark on your computer and go to regularly to see district level updates on SBCUSD's reopening of schools. We will circle back with you. We want to offer a follow-up community meeting in late June. We don't have that date scheduled yet, but we will offer a community meeting where you can hear how we took your feedback and see where we put it into the recommendation. So that's just a way to circle back with the community and reassure you that we are listening. So watch for that date and that time. That will be communicated the same way this meeting was communicated, through social media, through calls to the home. Those are our primary ways that we'll be able to communicate that with you. And then last but not least, I'm sure you heard the need for a lot of training of our school staff, and not just our school staff, our students as well. You've been home with your children for quite a while now, and you see that it takes quite a bit of teaching and training children to get them, or to engage with them and have them practice behaviors that may not be very comfortable for them. So they may not want to wash their hands on a regular basis. We're going to have to train them to do that. We have to train our staff to do the same. So a lot of training of our school teams. So we will be asking each school to develop an implementation team so that they can take the final recommendations and make them work at their school. Because what works at Cajon High School, for example, is not going to be the same that works at Pacific High School. We need our schools to be able to make this work within their given school settings. What happens at Muscoy Elementary, a very large elementary school, compared to what happens at Salinas Elementary, a much smaller school, needs to be taken into account. So these school teams will be instrumental in implementing the final guidelines. And so this concludes our session this evening. We want to thank you for joining us. We want to tell you that we miss your children greatly, so we ask you to give them a big hug on behalf of SBCUSD, letting them know that we're sad we didn't get to see them at the end of the school year, and tell them how proud we are, how brilliant they are. So if you can do that for us, that would be wonderful. We greatly appreciate it. Please, again, log in to see the board meeting on June 16th, and then watch for that follow-up meeting that will be happening at the end of June, so that you can see how this is all finalized. I want to thank the team for joining me this evening and for your dedication and commitment to keeping students and staff in San Bernardino safe and healthy. Have a wonderful evening. Give everyone lots of love. Oh, and remind the students that they're learning all the time, so we need them to continue reading, following current events, thinking critically and creatively, because they are our future generations and we need them to really move our country forward. Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening.